The glass walls of the Han Global headquarters didn't just reflect the skyline. They seemed to judge everyone who walked past them. It was a cathedral of cold light and expensive silence, a place where the air conditioner hummed at a frequency that felt like a constant, low-grade threat. In the center of the lobby, the marble floor was polished to such a mirror sheen that looking down felt like falling. This was a world of sharp edges, tailored Italian suits, and smiles that never quite reached the eyes. It was a place where weakness was the only sin that couldn't be forgiven, and status was the only currency that mattered. Nia stood behind the reception desk on the 42nd floor, her hands folded neatly on the polished granite surface. She was 27, with eyes that held a quiet, deep intelligence that most people here failed to notice because they were too busy looking at her shoes. Her shoes were sensible, comfortable, and 3 years old. In an office where the junior assistants wore red-bottomed heels that cost more than Nia's monthly rent, her footwear was a silent confession of her outsider status. She wasn't part of the inner circle, the golden clique of nepotism hires and Ivy League climbers who ruled the office social hierarchy. She was just the secretary, the black woman who organized the files, answered the phones, and absorbed the passive-aggressive sighs of the executives without complaint. She was invisible, a piece of office furniture that breathed. "Did you see what she brought for lunch again?" A voice whispered, sharp as a paper cut. It was Chloe, the senior executive assistant and self-appointed queen of the floor. She was standing by the espresso machine, leaning against the counter with a predatory grace, flanked by 2 giggling junior associates. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was pitched perfectly to carry across the quiet room. Leftover stew. The whole break room smells like distinct choices. Nia didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on her screen, typing an email to the logistics department. She had learned long ago that reacting only gave them fuel. If she stayed silent, if she stayed stone, eventually they would get bored and find someone else to peck at. But they rarely got bored. The cruelty was the point. It was how they bonded, cementing their own status by pointing out who didn't belong. "It's tragic, really," Chloe continued, taking a sip of her $7 latte. "Some people just don't understand the corporate aesthetic. Mr. Han hates clutter. He hates mess." The mention of Mr. Han made the air in the room drop 10 degrees.
Julian Han.
The CEO. The man whose name was whispered with a mix of reverence and absolute terror. He was rarely seen, a ghost in a bespoke suit who moved through the building surrounded by a phalanx of security guards who looked more like paramilitary operatives than corporate security. Rumors swirled around him like smoke. Some said his family owned half the shipping lines in the Pacific. Others whispered about connections to the underworld, about a legacy that was written in blood before it was washed clean with corporate money. Nia had only seen him once, from a distance, a silhouette of sharp angles and terrifying stillness. He was the king of this glass castle, and everyone, even Chloe, was afraid of him. But for Nia, the fear was different. She wasn't afraid of his power. She was afraid of losing the paycheck that kept her mother's medical bills paid. She needed this job. She needed to survive this world, even if it meant swallowing her pride every single day. The elevator chimed, a bright, artificial sound that sliced through the tension. The heavy steel doors slid open, but it wasn't a high-powered executive who stepped out. It was an old woman. She was tiny, her spine curved slightly under the weight of years, dressed in a gray cleaning uniform that hung loosely on her frail frame. She pushed a heavy janitorial cart that seemed to weigh more than she did, the wheels squeaking rhythmically against the expensive marble. It was a jarring sight. The cleaning crews usually worked at night, invisible ghosts who scrubbed away the sins of the day before the executives arrived. To see a cleaner here, now, in the middle of the morning rush, was a violation of the unwritten rules. The office went silent. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. It wasn't just that she was a cleaner. It was that she looked visibly out of place, like a smudge on a pristine lens. She was Asian, elderly, her hair pulled back in a severe, graying bun, her face a map of deep wrinkles and weathering. She stopped in the middle of the hallway, looking confused, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the handle of the cart. She looked at the signs on the wall, squinting, clearly unable to read the English placards. Chloe let out a short, disbelief-filled huff. "You have got to be kidding me," she said, her voice rising. "Security is just letting anyone in now. It smells like bleach and desperation in here already." The other assistants laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. No one moved to help. The men in the glass conference room kept talking, ignoring the old woman as if she didn't exist. The women at the desks stared with open disdain, waiting for someone to remove the eyesore. The old woman tried to push the cart forward, but one of the wheels caught on the edge of a plush rug. The cart tipped dangerously, a bucket of soapy water sloshing over the rim. She gasped, struggling to right it, her knuckles white. Nia stood up. She didn't think about it. She didn't look at Chloe. She just moved. It wasn't a calculated decision to be a hero. It was a reflex born of a life where looking away wasn't an option. She rounded the reception desk, her sensible heels silent on the carpet, and crossed the distance in 4 long strides. "Here," Nia said softly, her voice a gentle contrast to the harsh whispers of the room. "Let me get that for you." She reached out and grabbed the heavy cart, stabilizing it just before it could tip over completely. The old woman flinched, looking up at Nia with eyes that were dark, sharp, and unreadable. For a second, Nia felt a strange weight in that gaze, a scrutiny that felt far heavier than the situation warranted. But then the moment passed, and the woman just looked like a tired, confused grandmother. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with a heavy accent. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of old-world respect that looked jarring in the modern, aggressive office. "Will is bad." "It's okay," Nia said, smiling. It was a real smile, warm and unpracticed. "This rug is tricky. The wheels always catch on it. Where are you trying to go?" "Pantry," the woman said, pointing a shaking finger down the hall. "Need water." "I'll walk you there," Nia said, ignoring the burning sensation of a dozen pairs of eyes drilling into her back. "It's just around the corner. The tap in the men's room is broken, so you have to use the kitchen sink." "Nia," Chloe's voice cut through the air, sweet and poisonous. "The phones are ringing. We don't pay you to be a tour guide for the help. Security can handle this." Nia paused. She felt the humiliation heat the back of her neck, but she didn't let it show. She turned her head slightly, meeting Chloe's gaze with a calm that infuriated the other woman. "I'm on my break, Chloe. And she's not this, she's a person." She didn't wait for a response. She turned back to the old woman, gripping the cart handle firmly. "Come on. Let's get you some water. My name is Nia." The old woman looked at Chloe, then back at Nia. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It wasn't a smile of gratitude, exactly. It was the smile of someone who had just found something they were looking for. "I am Mrs. Kim," she said. As they walked away, the whispers erupted behind them, louder and more vicious than before. "Birds of a feather," someone muttered. "Trash helping trash," Nia heard it. She knew Mrs. Kim heard it too. But as they turned the corner, the old woman didn't look upset. She looked thoughtful. Her back straightened just a fraction, and the trembling in her hands seemed to vanish, as if it had never been there at all. But Nia didn't see that. She was too busy worrying about whether this act of kindness was going to cost her the only job she could find. Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet routine formed in the shadows of the 42nd floor. The corporate world moved at a breakneck speed, a blur of mergers, acquisitions, and power plays, but in the small, windowless pantry at 12:30 p.m., time seemed to slow down. Mrs. Kim would appear with her cart, ostensibly to change the trash bags or wipe down the counters, but she always lingered when Nia came in to heat up her lunch. It started with a shared orange. Nia had been peeling one, the citrus scent cutting through the stale coffee air, and saw Mrs. Kim watching her. The older woman looked pale, her energy flagging. Without a word, Nia split the orange in half and offered the larger portion to her. Mrs. Kim had hesitated, eyeing the fruit like it was a trap, before taking it with 2 hands. Now, it was a ritual. Nia brought extra food from home, Simple meals, seasoned rice, grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, packed in Tupperware containers that had seen better days. They sat on the two folding chairs tucked behind the vending machines, hidden from the view of the main corridor. "You eat too little," Mrs. Kim said one Tuesday, poking at Nia's modest portion of rice. "Young woman needs strength. This place." She waved a hand toward the door, encompassing the entire glass and steel edifice. "This place eats people." Nia chuckled, a tired sound. "You can say that again." "I'm okay, Mrs. Kim. I'm used to stretching things. My mom taught me how to make a little go a long way." "Your mother," Mrs. Kim said, her eyes sharp again. She had a way of asking questions that felt like interrogations, though her tone remained gentle. "She is proud of you? Working in Big Tower?" "She was," Nia corrected softly, looking down at her hands. "She passed away last year. The medical bills were a lot. That's why I'm here. The insurance is good and the pay is better than anything else I can get, even if the people are." She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of her tormentors. "Cruel," Mrs. Kim finished for her. She took a bite of the chicken Nia had made. She chewed slowly, savoring the spice. "They are cruel because they are small. Small dogs bark loudest." "Maybe," Nia sighed. "But small dogs can still bite. Chloe, the blonde woman, she's been trying to get me fired for months. She thinks I don't fit the image of the front desk. She wants her friend from college to have my spot." Mrs. Kim's expression darkened. For a split second, the frailty vanished completely. Her jaw set, and her eyes, usually clouded with age, turned into two pieces of obsidian. The air around her seemed to change, growing heavy and charged with a sudden, intense pressure. "Chloe," she repeated the name, tasting it like spoiled milk. "She treats you bad? She hurts you?" "It's just words," Nia said, missing the shift in the older woman's demeanor. "And extra work. Hiding files so I can't find them. Spilling coffee, and making me clean it up. Petty stuff. I can handle it. My dad used to say, dignity is what you have when no one is watching. They can't take that." Mrs. Kim looked at Nia for a long time. Then, she reached out and patted Nia's hand. Her skin was rough, calloused, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Your father was a wise man. Dignity is rare currency. Expensive. Most people here," she gestured toward the door again, "they are bankrupt." "What about you, Mrs. Kim?" Nia asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Do you have family? Children?" Mrs. Kim went still. She looked down at the plastic container lid in her hand. "I have a son," she said quietly. "He is very busy. He works very hard. Too hard. He forgets to eat. He forgets to sleep." "Does he know you're working here?" Nia asked gently, pushing that heavy cart. Mrs. Kim let out a dry laugh. "He thinks I am in retirement home, playing bingo." Knitting scarves, she looked up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "He worries too much. He thinks he is king of the world, but he forgets who changed his diapers. I like to work. I like to observe. See the world he built." "He sounds successful," Nia said. "Success is dangerous," Mrs. Kim murmured, her voice dropping. "It attracts snakes. Many snakes in this grass, Nia. You must be careful." Just then, the pantry door swung open. Chloe stood there, holding an empty mug, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. The high-status executive assistant looked from Nia to the old cleaner, and a sneer curled her lip. "Unbelievable," Chloe laughed, shaking her head. "I didn't realize we were running a soup kitchen." "Nia, Mr. Han's team is asking for the quarterly reports. The ones I told you to print 2 hours ago." "I printed them," Nia said, standing up quickly. "I put them on your desk." "Well, they aren't there," Chloe lied, her eyes glittering with malice. "So, either you're lying or you're incompetent. Which is it? Stop feeding the stray animals and get back to work." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like gunshots. Mrs. Kim watched her go. This time Nia saw it. She saw the way Mrs. Kim's hand tightened around the plastic fork until it snapped in half with a sharp crack. The sound was loud in the small room. She will learn, Mrs. Kim whispered, and the voice didn't belong to a cleaning lady. It belonged to someone who gave orders that ended lives. She will learn. The atmosphere on the 42nd floor shifted a few days later. It wasn't just the usual stress. It was a vibrating, high-wire tension that made the air feel thin. The rumor mill, usually a slow stream of gossip, had turned into a roaring river. The big boss was coming. Not just for a walkthrough, but for the signing of the Jeju contract, a multi-billion-dollar deal that would cement Han Global's dominance in the Asian logistics market. Security was tripled. Men in dark suits with earpieces stood at every elevator bank. The office was scrubbed until it smelled like pure chemical lemon. And in the center of the storm was Chloe, barking orders, terrorizing the interns, and checking her reflection in every available surface. She was positioning herself to be the face that greeted the delegation, the perfect, polished gatekeeper. Nia was relegated to the background, buried under a mountain of paperwork that Chloe had dumped on her desk at the last minute. "Keep out of sight," Chloe had hissed that morning. "We need a specific look for the Korean delegation. Elegant, refined. Just stay in the copy room." It was humiliating, but Nia did the work. She collated the binders, checked the font sizes, and ensured every page was perfect. She was in the break room, frantically stapling the final packets, when Mrs. Kim rolled her card in. The older woman looked more tired than usual, her face pale. "Big day," Mrs. Kim said, leaning on her mop. "Huge," Nia said, not looking up. "If this deal goes through, everyone gets a bonus. Well, everyone except the support staff, probably. But it's good for the company." "You work hard," Mrs. Kim observed. "Others talk." "Talking is a skill too, I guess," Nia said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I just need to get these to the conference room before 2 p.m. Chloe said if I'm 1 minute late, I'm fired." "She said that?" Mrs. Kim asked. Explicitly. At 1:45 p.m., Nia stacked the heavy binders onto a trolley. She checked her appearance: simple blouse, dark skirt, hair pulled back. She looked professional, even if she didn't look like a runway model. She pushed the trolley out into the hallway. The corridor was empty. The meeting was set to start in 15 minutes. As Nia passed the executive washroom, the door swung open and Chloe stepped out. She stopped, eyeing the trolley. "Finally," Chloe said. "I'll take those." "I can take them in," Nia said, gripping the handle. "I need to set them up." "I said I'll take them," Chloe snapped, stepping forward. "You're not going in there. The chairman of the Jeju group is traditional. He doesn't want to see someone like you fumbling with the papers." "Someone like me?" Nia asked, her voice steady but cold. "Yes." Unpolished, Chloe grabbed the stack of binders from the top of the trolley. But as she pulled, she deliberately twisted her wrist. The top 3 binders slid off the stack. They didn't just fall, they cascaded. One hit the floor with a heavy thud, the rings popping open. Papers exploded across the hallway floor: confidential financial projections, seating charts, legal addendums. It was a disaster. "Oops," Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She stepped back, looking at her watch. "Oh no. 10 minutes to the meeting. Look at this mess." "You are so clumsy, Nia." "You did that," Nia whispered, staring at the scattered papers. "Who's going to believe you?" Chloe hissed, leaning in close. "You're nobody. And now, you're the nobody who ruined the presentation. Pick it up. Or don't. I'm going to tell Mr. Han that the secretary failed to prepare the materials." Chloe turned on her heel and walked toward the conference room, leaving Nia kneeling on the floor, frantically gathering the papers. The pages were mixed up. The order was destroyed. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Nia's throat. She was going to lose her job. She was going to lose everything. She didn't see the shadow fall over her until a hand reached down and picked up a sheet of paper. It was Mrs. Kim. She had abandoned her cart and was kneeling on the expensive marble, her old knees cracking. She didn't say a word. She just started sorting. Her eyes scanned the page numbers with a terrifying speed. "Mrs. Kim, don't," Nia gasped, tears stinging her eyes. You'll get in trouble. This isn't your job. Hush, Mrs. Kim said, her voice iron hard. Sort. Page 12 goes after 11.
Fast.
They worked in a blur of motion. The cleaner and the secretary, on their hands and knees in the hall of power. Mrs. Kim moved with a dexterity that belied her age, her hands flying. In 5 minutes, the binders were reassembled. They weren't perfect, but they were complete. Go, Mrs. Kim said, helping Nia stand. She smoothed down Nia's skirt. Head up. Shoulders back. You are not small. Walk like you own the room. Nia took a breath, nodded, and pushed the trolley toward the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. She didn't know that Mrs. Kim stayed in the hallway, watching her go, a look of profound, dangerous calculation on her face. Mrs. Kim reached into the pocket of her cleaning smock and pulled out a phone. It wasn't a cheap prepaid model. It was the latest satellite smartphone, sleek and black. She typed a single text message. Let them in. I am watching. The conference room was a theater of intimidation. The long mahogany table was occupied by 20 men. On one side, the Jeju delegation, stern-faced and silent. On the other, the Han global executives. At the head of the table sat a man Nia had only ever seen in magazines.
Julian Han.
He was younger than she expected, maybe in his early 30s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from cold marble. He wore a suit that cost more than Nia's entire education. He was reading a file, his expression utterly bored. Chloe was standing by his side, pouring water into his crystal glass. She looked up as Nia entered, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She had expected Nia to be outside, crying over a pile of ruined papers. I have the files, Mr. Han, Nia announced. Her voice shook slightly, but she remembered Mrs. Kim's words. Shoulders back. She walked to the table and began distributing the binders. Chloe intercepted her halfway. Give them to me, she hissed under her breath. I've got it, Nia said, sidestepping her. She placed the first binder in front of the Jeju chairman, bowing respectfully. She placed the second in front of Julian Han. Julian didn't look up. He opened the binder. He flipped a page. Then he stopped. He pulled a small, folded piece of yellow sticky note from between the pages. It was stuck to the financial summary. It was a note from Mrs. Kim, intended for Nia to see when she sorted the papers, but in the rush, they had missed it. Julian stared at the sticky note. His eyes, previously bored, suddenly sharpened. He read the handwriting he had known his entire life. He looked at the note, then he looked up at Nia. For the first time, the CEO really looked at her. Where did you get this? Julian asked. His voice was deep, quiet, and commanded absolute silence in the room. Chloe stepped forward quickly. I am so sorry, Mr. Han. The secretary is incompetent. I told her to check the files. If there is trash in there, it is her fault. I'll have security escort her out immediately. I asked, Julian said, his eyes never leaving Nia's face, where you got this. Nia froze. She looked at the note in his hand. She recognized the jagged scrawl of the cleaning lady. If she said Mrs. Kim helped her, Mrs. Kim could get fired for touching confidential documents. Cleaners weren't allowed to handle executive files. Nia swallowed hard. It's mine, sir.
I'm sorry.
I was making notes. Chloe scoffed. She's lying. She probably dropped the files and scrambled to put them back together. She's clumsy and careless. Julian looked at Chloe. Then he looked back at the note. He slowly unfolded it. On the yellow paper, in Korean characters that only he and his mother used in their private letters, was a single phrase. She is the only one with a spine. Watch her. Julian closed the binder. The room held its breath. Chloe, Julian said softly. Yes, Mr. Han? Chloe beamed, expecting the order to fire Nia. Bring me the cleaning woman, Julian said. The room went dead silent. The what? Chloe stammered. The cleaning woman, Julian repeated, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a physical weight in the room. The one who works this floor. Bring her in. Now. The minutes that followed were excruciating. Nia stood by the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified. She had just doomed Mrs. Kim. Had the note been an insult? Had she ruined everything? The door opened. 2 security guards escorted Mrs. Kim into the room. She still wore her gray uniform, holding a rag in her hand. She looked small, frail, and entirely unimpressed by the billionaires sitting around her. Chloe let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "This is her, Mr. Han. The one who wanders around bothering the staff. I've been meaning to have her reassigned." Julian Han stood up. The sound of his chair scraping back was loud. He walked around the massive table. He didn't walk toward Nia. He didn't walk toward the Jeju delegation. He walked straight to the old woman in the dirty uniform. He stopped in front of her. The tension was unbearable. Chloe looked confused. Nia held her breath. Julian Han, the most feared man in the city, the man who dissolved companies with a signature, slowly sank to his knees. He bowed his head, lowering himself until his forehead almost touched the floor at the cleaner's feet. "Mother," Julian said, his voice cracking with a mixture of respect and fear. "I didn't know you were here." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Chloe's face went slack, her skin draining of color so fast she looked like a corpse. The Jeju chairman stood up, bowing deeply to the cleaning lady. Mrs. Kim, Madam Han, looked down at her son. She didn't tell him to rise. She reached out and patted his head, then looked up, her eyes locking onto Chloe like a missile target. "You have a nice office, Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong, shedding the accent she had faked for weeks. "But you have a rat problem." She pointed a calloused finger at Chloe. "She," Madam Han said, her voice turning to ice, "spilled the papers." She laughed when the cart fell. "She treats the people who serve you like dirt." Then she pointed at Nia. "And she," Madam Han's voice softened, filled with a warmth that stunned the room, "she is the only person in this entire building who offered a seat to a tired old woman." Madam Han looked at Nia, her eyes twinkling. "I told you, Nia, success attracts snakes. But sometimes it attracts lions too." Julian stood up. He turned to look at Chloe. His face was a mask of terrifying calm. "Security," he said. "Yes, sir." The guard stepped forward. "Escort this woman out," Julian said, gesturing to Chloe. "She is banned from all Han Global properties. Effective immediately." "But," Chloe gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Mr. Han, please. I didn't know. She was just a cleaner." "That," Julian said, his voice cold as death, "is exactly the problem." As Chloe was dragged out, sobbing, the room remained frozen. Julian turned to Nia. He walked over to her, closing the distance. He looked at the secretary, who had been invisible for 3 years. "My mother," Julian said, "is a very difficult woman to please. She hates everyone." Nia stared at him, unable to speak. "If she says you have a spine," Julian said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "then I believe her." He extended a hand. "I think you're in the wrong job, Nia. We don't need you answering phones anymore." Madam Han stepped forward, linking her arm through Nia's. "No," she corrected her son. "She is my friend first. Business second. Now, Julian, get us some real food. The cafeteria here is garbage." Nia looked from the son to the mother, the reality of the moment crashing over her. The game had changed. The glass walls didn't look so judgmental anymore. They looked like they were finally letting the light in. The transition from the reception desk to the executive suite wasn't a promotion. It was a transplantation into a different atmosphere entirely. The air on the top floor was thinner, scented with sandalwood and cold ambition. Nia no longer sat behind the granite fortress in the lobby. She was now installed at a sleek, glass desk directly outside Julian Han's massive double doors. The title on her new badge read Executive Liaison, a vague term that meant she was the only person allowed to walk into the lion's den without knocking. But while the title had changed, the eyes watching her hadn't. They had just become more dangerous. If the lobby was a high school cafeteria of petty insults, the executive floor was a gladiatorial arena where the weapons were invisible. The remaining members of Chloe's clique, now leaderless but twice as venomous, watched Nia with the predatory patience of sharks circling a shipwreck. They didn't whisper about her shoes anymore. Now, the rumors were darker, heavier. They whispered that she was a fixer for the Han family's dirtier secrets, or worse, a temporary amusement for a bored king. They smiled at her with teeth that looked too white and too sharp, dropping files on her desk with passive-aggressive force. "Mr. Han needs this translated by noon," a junior VP named Marcus said, dropping a stack of documents in technical Korean. He knew she didn't speak the language. He wanted her to fail. He wanted to prove that kindness was a fluke and competence was exclusive to their bloodlines. But they didn't know about the nights Nia stayed late, not to cry but to learn. They didn't know she was using a translation app and cross-referencing legal dictionaries until her eyes burned. And they certainly didn't know about the quiet shadow that stood in the doorway of her office when the rest of the building was dark. Julian Han didn't speak much. He would emerge from his office around 9 p.m., his tie loosened, the weight of an invisible empire on his shoulders. He would stand there, watching her work, his face unreadable. "Go home, Nia," he said one rainy Tuesday, his voice low, vibrating through the quiet room. "I'm almost done with the logistics summary," she replied, not looking up. The numbers didn't match the shipping manifest. "Someone in the Busan port is skimming off the top. About 4%. Julian went still. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a sudden, sharp intensity. He walked over to her desk, his movements fluid and predatory, like a panther stalking prey. He placed a hand on the glass surface, leaning in. "Show me," he commanded. When she pointed out the discrepancy, Julian didn't get angry. A cold, terrifying smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't belong in a boardroom. It belonged in a back alley where debts were collected in blood. "You have a sharp eye," he murmured, looking at her, not the paper. "Most people look at the total. You look at the cracks." "My mom taught me to check the receipt," Nia said simply, her heart hammering as his cologne, musk and rain, washed over her. She said the devil is in the details. "The devil is everywhere," Julian corrected softly. "But so are the angels, it seems." He straightened up, his eyes lingering on her face. "Leave it. I'll handle the Busan team. They won't be skimming by morning." Nia shivered.
She knew what that meant.
She had Googled the Han family history. She knew the rumors of the shadow syndicate that operated behind the logistics front. She knew she was working for a monster. But looking at him, seeing the exhaustion etched around his eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man holding up the sky alone. And for the first time, she wanted to help him hold it. The invitation arrived on her desk 3 weeks later. It was heavy cardstock, embossed with gold leaf, smelling of expensive paper. The annual Han Global Gala. It was the social event of the season, a night where the city's elite pretended to like each other while brokering deals that would bankrupt small countries. Usually, support staff were invisible at these events, blending into the walls. But this invitation had her name on it. Nia Williams. Not guest, not staff, a named attendee. "It's a test," Madame Han said. The old woman was sitting in Nia's office chair, spinning slowly while eating a bag of cheap chips she had smuggled in. She had stopped wearing the cleaning uniform, but she still refused to wear the designer clothes her son bought her, preferring comfortable tracksuits that made her look like a terrifying gym teacher. "A test of what?" Nia asked, looking at the dress Julian had sent. It was midnight blue, velvet, modest but devastatingly cut. It was the kind of dress that declared war. "Of survival," Madame Han crunched a chip loudly. "The wolves will be there. The board members. The rival families. They want to see who sits at Julian's right hand. If you crumble, they will eat you. If you stand," she paused, her dark eyes glittering. "If you stand, they will bow." "I don't want them to bow," Nia said, touching the velvet fabric. "I just want to do my job." "Your job has changed," Madame Han said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. "Julian is strong, but he is alone. A king without a queen is just a target. Tonight, you are not a secretary. You are a shield. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds and fake laughter. The chandeliers were so bright they hurt the eyes. Nia stood by the entrance, feeling the weight of the room press against her. She felt exposed, despite the high neckline of her dress. When Julian appeared at the top of the stairs, the room went silent. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like armor, his expression bored and dangerous. He scanned the crowd, dismissing billionaires and politicians with a glance, until his eyes found her. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. He walked down the stairs, ignoring the outstretched hands of people desperate for his attention, and came straight to her side. "Breathe," he whispered, offering his arm. "They smell fear." "I'm not afraid," Nia lied, taking his arm. Her hand felt small against his bicep, which was hard as rock. "Good," Julian said, "because I need you to watch the man in the gray suit by the bar. Don't look at him directly. Just observe. Who is he?" "A problem," Julian said. "He represents the faction that thinks I'm too soft because I haven't killed anyone this week." Nia's grip tightened on his arm. She scanned the room, using the reflection in a waiter's silver tray. The man in gray was smiling, holding a champagne flute, but his eyes weren't on the party. They were locked on Julian. And he wasn't drinking. "He's not drinking," Nia whispered. "And he keeps checking his watch." "Is that so?" Julian's voice was casual, but his body tensed. "Stay close to me, Nia. Tonight might be interesting." The dinner was a masterclass in tension. Nia was seated at the head table, to Julian's right. The placement was a scandal. The board members glared. The socialites whispered behind their fans. But Nia kept her back straight, remembering Mrs. Kim's training. Shoulders back. Own the room. She engaged in polite conversation, deflecting insults with a grace that confused her attackers. When a senator's wife asked, "And what exactly do you do for Mr. Han?" Nia smiled sweetly and replied, "I'm sure he doesn't have to waste time on trivialities." The table went quiet. Julian hid a smirk behind his wine glass. But the danger wasn't at the table. It was in the kitchen. The soup course was served. A delicate consommé. The waiters moved with synchronized precision. As the bowl was placed in front of Julian, Nia noticed something. A tiny, almost invisible tremor in the waiter's hand. It was the same waiter she had seen talking to the man in the gray suit earlier. And there was a smell, faint, metallic, cutting through the aroma of the broth. Bitter almonds. Julian picked up his spoon. He was deep in conversation with a rival shipping magnate, distracted. He lifted the spoon to his lips. "No." The word ripped out of Nia's throat before she could think. She didn't just speak, she moved. She reached out and knocked the spoon from Julian's hand. The silver clattered loudly against the fine china, sending soup splashing onto the pristine white tablecloth. The entire ballroom gasped. The silence was instant and deafening. A secretary had just slapped food away from the Mafia prince. It was a death sentence. Julian froze. He looked at the spilled soup. Then he looked at Nia. His eyes were wide, dark voids of shock. "Nia," he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Don't eat it," she whispered, her voice trembling but her gaze steady. The smell. Bitter almonds. And the waiter. He was shaking. Julian turned his head slowly to look at the waiter standing behind him. The man's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He took a step back, dropping the serving tray with a crash. "Security," Julian roared. The sound was like a thunderclap, shattering the polite veneer of the gala. The room erupted into chaos. The waiter bolted, but Julian's guards were on him in seconds. Julian stood up, towering over the table. He didn't look at the attacker. He looked at Nia. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading, leaving her cold. She had just caused a scene. She had ruined the gala. Julian reached out. His hand, usually so controlled, was trembling slightly. He took her chin in his fingers, forcing her to look at him. "You," he said, his voice thick with an emotion the room had never heard from him. "You saw what my own guards missed." "I was watching," she said softly. "Like you asked." The drive back to the penthouse was silent, But it wasn't the silence of distance. It was the silence of a world that had fundamentally shifted. The gala had ended in arrests. The man in the gray suit had been escorted out by federal agents. A tip-off Julian had arranged, executed perfectly once the attempt on his life was confirmed. The soft CEO had just purged his enemies in one stroke, but he hadn't done it alone. They arrived at his private residence, a fortress in the sky overlooking the glittering city. Julian poured 2 drinks. His hands were steady now. He handed a glass of amber liquid to Nia. "You saved my life," he said. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at her. "I just reacted," Nia said, taking the glass. "I couldn't let them hurt you." "Why?" Julian asked. He took a step closer. The air between them crackled.
"You know who I am. You know what I am. People like me. We don't get saved.
We get removed." "I don't care about the rumors," Nia said. She set the glass down. She was tired of the dancing, tired of the fear. "I know the man who buys his mother spicy chips because she hates the cafeteria food. I know the man who works in the dark so his employees can have lights in their homes. You're not a monster, Julian. You're just lonely." Julian looked as if she had slapped him. Her words stripped away the armor he had worn since he was a child. He closed the distance between them. He reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. "You are dangerous, Nia Williams," he whispered. "More dangerous than any assassin." "Why?" "Because," he leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, "you make me want to be the man you think I am." He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative movie screen kiss. It was desperate, consuming. It was the taste of whiskey and survival. It was a promise made in the dark, a sealing of a pact between the king of the underworld and the woman who had walked into the fire to pull him out. 6 months later, the Han Global headquarters was different. The air was still expensive, the glass still imposing, but the fear was gone. The snakes had been rooted out, fired, or prosecuted. The logistics department ran with efficient transparency. And in the lobby, the receptionists were allowed to wear sneakers if they wanted to. The elevator to the 42nd floor chimed. Madame Han stepped out, pushing a stroller. She wasn't cleaning anymore. She was now the terrifyingly effective director of internal audit, a role she performed with glee, but today she was on grandmother duty. Even though there was no baby yet, she was just practicing with a doll to pressure her son. She walked past the new executive liaison, a young man terrified of her, and kicked open the double doors to the CEO's office. "Julian, the flowers for the altar must be orchids, not roses." "Roses are cliché," she shouted. Julian was standing by the window. He turned, smiling. He looked lighter, younger. "We already discussed this, Mother. Nia wants lilies." "Nia has terrible taste in flowers. Excellent taste in men, but terrible in flowers," Madame Han grumbled, sitting on the sofa. The side door opened. Nia walked in. She wasn't wearing a secretary's skirt. She was wearing a white power suit that glowed in the morning sun. On her finger, a diamond the size of a small planet caught the light. It wasn't just a ring. It was a declaration. "I heard that," Nia said, smiling. She walked over to Julian, who immediately reached for her hand, as if he needed the physical contact to ground himself. "Mother thinks lilies are common," Julian said, kissing Nia's knuckles. "Mother thinks anything less than gold-plated peonies is common," Nia teased. She looked at Julian, her eyes full of a quiet, unshakable love. They had won. It hadn't been easy. The press had scrutinized them. The board had fought them. But the combination of Julian's ruthless strategy and Nia's unassailable moral standing had been unstoppable. The Black Secretary and the Mafia Prince had become the power couple the city couldn't stop watching. Julian pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. He looked over her shoulder at the city's skyline, his city. "Let them talk," Julian whispered into her hair. "We have work to do. And a wedding to plan," Nia reminded him. "And lunch," Madame Han interjected. "I brought stew. Spicy." Nia laughed, the sound ringing clear and bright in the room that used to be a tomb of silence. She looked at the man who had burned the world for her, and the mother who had tested her soul and found it worthy. "Okay, Mia said, leaning into the embrace of her husband-to-be. Lunch first.
Then.
We rule the world.